Pardo, followed by J.P. Cataviella.
Good evening. My name is Veronica Pardo. I'm here on behalf of the California Refuse Recycling Council, and our members are haulers, processors, recyclers, and composters operating throughout the state of California. And CRC submitted individual comments, but we were also participated as part of that larger stakeholder group, industry compost group, submitting a letter with specific recommendations for the general order. And we thank you. We're pleased to see that the detention pond adjustment from a minimum 25-year return annual total precipitation value to the 25-year, 24-hour peak storm event at a minimum. Many of our concerns were addressed today and articulated very well by the panels, specifically the industry and local government panels around the economic impacts that this general order will have on our industry. And I would just like to highlight the fact that as we see more and more food waste diversion in California, the most putrescible methane producing portion of this waste stream, these are tier 2 facilities. These are higher tiered facilities both under CalRecycle and the Water Board, and these really are the facilities that we will need to manage this material. And as we've heard so much today, this material will go somewhere. If it's not going to the landfill, it's going to end up somewhere, and we'd like to see it managed properly within the state of California. So, you know, again, those comments as well about harmonizing with the other agencies, that's crucial. And we thank you for your time today and your comments so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for staying. JP, followed by Deborah Kaufman.
Thank you for saying my name correctly.
JP, that's a lot of energy for this late at night. We need to harness that.
I realized I needed to get to the podium and not have a lag time.
Do you have some of that candy that they talk
about? Hopefully for extra karma points, I'm speaking not just for Dairy Cares, but for California Cattlemen's Association and Ag Council, so that we don't all have to be marching up here.
Well, and for the record, I'm going to stipulate that cows are good.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We did submit comments for the March 2nd written comment deadline. We feel they weren't fully addressed, so that's why we're making oral comments today. However, I want to say our concern is not about water quality protection. We want water quality protection. It's just about duplication of regulation is what we're concerned about here mostly today. We're also a little confused, and I have had more than one lawyer look at this for us and try to explain things to us. And I think they're smart lawyers. They do a lot of work with the Water Board, and so it's been a little bit confusing to understand exactly how the order applies to dairies. So if I say something wrong, it's just because of misunderstanding, and I really have tried. So the first thing is, it's not completely clear to us how this applies to dairies. There is agricultural composting is exempt under certain circumstances, and the definition that's on page A1 of the order describes something that might apply to dairies. However, in the very next paragraph, they talk about agricultural materials, not agricultural composting, not including manure. So we asked for clarification on that in our written comments, haven't received any, and lacking that, where we think we're forced to assume that this order in fact applies to dairies. Okay. Even if we were exempt under the agricultural composting definition, if we move more than 1,000 cubic yards off the site, then we wouldn't be exempt, and that's not a lot. That's about 500 tons, and that's a very, very small. So we're kind of operating under the assumption that one way or another, anybody who's doing composting on a dairy is going to be kind of under this. Okay. But we would really appreciate clarification from the Water Board as to how this really does apply to dairies. Okay. Then once we get past that issue, then we can go to finding 13, which, like others, we appreciate the effort that was put in here to, I think, to avoid some duplication of orders, and also for an orderly transition between existing regulations to some future set of regulations. Finding 13 allows us to continue to discharge under our individual orders or a conditional waiver until those expire or come up for renewal, but it does not appear to allow this for general orders, and that's confusing. So a conditional waiver over here, an individual order in here, somewhere in the middle is general orders, but they're not allowed to transition? That doesn't make any sense to us. Is that just a mistake, or is there actually
This
an
goes
attempt?
to
So you have a general order for composting?
No, we have a general order for dairies that covers the activities of composting on the dairies.
Okay.
So, for example, the leachate that we've heard so much about today, that there are rules in our order that says, hey, that's got to drain to the lagoon. That has to be captured. And really, the leachate from non-composted manure, we would argue, is more of a threat than the composted. So we're already dealing with that higher level of regulation. We just want to make sure that that works, that covers us for this.
Oh, so you don't have to get another one, too.
Right.
Right.
Kind
So
of like the landfill example we talked about earlier. And I'm seeing Andrew nodding his head over there, so maybe he'll
Andrew?
provide.
I'll remember that.
And add feedlots to this too, right?
Absolutely, because I'm here for cattlemen today, too. Yes, that's right, please. And then,
Lawyers weren't cattle and dairy.
that I'm not sure. So I think that clarification on the general orders are you attempting to cover that as well would make a lot of sense. In the second part of paragraph 13, it sort of talks about the future, and it says, if the composting is co-located at a facility with an individual WDR with comparable requirements, that should be good enough. Again, I think that you should include general order in that thinking, because all of the dairies are regulated under general orders.
We agree.
Okay, well, that's great. So I think
Yeah,
I'm good.
take it back
Okay.
to all the lawyers.
I think I'm going to stop on that point and then just make my very last statement, which is
That was
you know,
clear, thank you.
we were just in here 2 days ago participating in the stakeholder process on the fees. And, and it's great. We appreciate that that's coming along. Obviously, the last thing we want is big fee increases. Our worst nightmare is a situation where this order passes, and now the dairies have to unroll under this order, and all this work we've been doing to keep the fees under control on this other, because that isn't going away. We're going to be under a dairy order regardless of what happens with this. Now, if we have to pay 2 fees, if we're under 2 orders, that just doesn't make sense to us. It's not necessary. It can be fixed, and that's
We agree.
what you'll do. Thank you.
Okay, but not to complicate it, but I just want to make sure I understand. What if you move product off the dairy? You're
So-
covered right now under the general order?
So we will work on this. There's no reason to have a dairy order that deals with composting and a composting order that deals with composting. We will make sure that is worked out. The issue about the about the transporting off won't apply if he's under the dairy order and they're dealing with it under that and feedlot order. And so we'll work through that. We don't want to create more overlapping permit regulations. And since we've just added 5% to our fees by being here for 12 hours today on this, that we don't want to add to that.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Kaufman with Sorry. Okay. All right.
Yep, fast.
Deborah Kaufman with Stop Waste, the Alameda County Waste Management Authority. We're a public agency. We represent all the cities and in Alameda County, 1.6 million people. We've spent all of our history trying to get organics out of the landfill and provide food and green waste diversion programs to all the residents in the county and to most of the businesses as well. We support the board's effort to protect water quality and certainly understand the need to regulate runoff from compost facilities. But as you've heard today, there is a shortage of compost processing capacity both in our county and in our state. And we need to find economic and regulatory ways to incentivize the development of new and expanded compost processing statewide. Without that, it'll be difficult to meet our local and statewide organics diversion goals, and also to realize the enormous environmental benefits of making and using compost that have been outlined today. And I have a litany of those which I'm not going to cite because I think
Trust me, I used to do composting. You don't have to sell any of us on the value of composting.
I'm not going to. I think
I can speak for all my colleagues that we know that compost is great.
yes, it's been done very effectively today, so I will not repeat
Make it
those.
into an anti-aging cream too. You're like golden. My friend.
Okay,
Probably
so
does that.
the new regulatory costs will make it harder for facilities to expand and for new facilities to be constructed. That's not a reason not to do regulations, but it's a good reason. I mean, we need to balance the need for increased compost development and processing with water quality. And I have some healthy skepticism about the 100 new facilities that we need to achieve the goals. We've been working hard for a long time in Alameda County to site new compost processing capacity with great difficulty. And the regulatory and economic bar is already very high. Just want to, impress upon you the fact that, not that we shouldn't make it higher, but that there are possible unintended consequences of doing that, and some of those are the possibility of this material going toward worse environmental solutions that are cheaper, such as using green waste as ADC and land apps. So, communities are always looking for lower cost ways to manage their solid waste, and the cost is absolutely an issue. And I heard earlier that landfilling was a lot more expensive. That's not always the case when you're sending your material to a fully permitted facility for food and green waste. We've not always found that to be the case. So there is a competition issue there. And so the regulations need to balance all of those environmental benefits of using more compost with protecting water quality and groundwater. So we would encourage the performance-based standards, the additional flexibility, and also ask you to work with the other partners more to whatever regulations are promulgated. We'd like to see additional effort with carbon calorie cycle to develop financial incentives and programs to help compost facilities comply with these regulations and help foster the growth of needed compost processing capacity in the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Alsvogt, back, followed by Nick Lapis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Andrew Alsvogt with the Central Valley Water Board, and I just had two quick things to add to what I had talked about before. The first is, without this order, we're really in the position, given what we know about the leachate, what we know about impacts to groundwater, of having to go and permit these facilities in some way. And for us right now, that's individual orders. So just in the past 6 months, we've gotten 2 sets of citizen complaints about 2 facilities related to off-property discharges. These were unpermitted facilities. We need to get them permitted. So either they're going to come under this order or they're going to get individual permits. And we're going to have to start seriously looking at all the facilities in our region, given what we're finding. And so just to sum up, we will use this general order. It will really help our workload. It'll help to get these facilities permitted in a comprehensive way. And thank you. Support the order.
Thank you for being brief, but I have a question. One of the issues that's come up in terms of unintended consequences is the greater land application of green waste and other waste. How are you equipped to deal with that?
So sure.
What would you say to these folks about what your commitment would be to that?
Well, my commitment, so I'm the chief prosecutor for the region. If there is illegal diversion of waste to land, that would not be permitted in our region. I would say either contact me directly. People could also submit anonymous complaints through the Cal EPA complaint line, and we will absolutely, definitely look into it. I mean, we have an irrigated lands program where we allow application of green materials if it's done agronomically, and we absolutely monitor that. Outside of that, we would take enforcement action. Thank you.
Mr. Lapis, followed by Linda Novick.
Chief of Enforcement was here earlier. I think he had to go, but I think he was here to tell you that we are taking enforcement and have taken enforcement and will continue to take enforcement on illegal land application.
Hi, good evening. Nick Lapis with Californians Against Waste. For those of you who are not familiar with us, CEW is an environmental organization. We're a membership-based, statewide organization that works on pollution prevention, recycling, composting policies. I wrote 3 pages of notes on how great compost is, but I think you probably want me to skip them. I will just say there's a reason why us and other environmental organizations spend so much time promoting composting. And that's because this same material, again, a compost facility, it's not a factory that manufactures compost. It's material that's being produced in the world. And that same material can go to a facility like a landfill or a direct land application site where it's a source of pollution, water pollution, air pollution, et cetera. Or it could be handled in a way where it makes a product that has all these great environmental benefits, from carbon benefits to drought benefits, et cetera. I'll just indulge 1 second on a benefit of compost that I think we kind of glossed over a little bit. Somebody mentioned earlier the short-lived climate pollutant plan that the Air Resources Board has come out with. So that's in response to legislation that was passed last year, where the legislature told the ARB to come up with a plan for dealing with short-lived climate pollutants. If you look at that plan, they have said we need to stop completely the practice of landfilling organics in landfills. We need to get 90% of it out by 2025. And it's one of their main targets that they identify in the plan. And just a quick quote, they say, SLCPs may be responsible for about 40% or more of global warming to date. Cutting emissions of these pollutants is the only way to immediately slow global warming. So, we're talking about not just yet another AB 32 strategy. We're talking about something that has an immediate impact in the climate, and really it delivers this whole impact in 12 years. So diverting that material from landfills is hugely important. Like I said, I'll skip everything else on the benefits of compost.
Be good, because you're down to 1 minute.
I did want to get to some specifics, a few specific changes recommended, and then a couple policy recommendations.
Talk fast. You have a whole room full of people behind you, so talk fast.
One thing that I'm not sure was intentional, but is a big change, is in that, if you indulge me just for a second, if we can look at the finding number 13 that was referenced earlier. So this is the most recent change to the general order, and it was done, my understanding is, to help facilitate the facilities that are already under a WDR to allow a transition for them. But if you look at the section that was stricken at the very bottom, it seems like that now prohibits a regional board from adopting a conditional waiver or a WDR that's less stringent than the order. I'm guessing that might have been an inadvertent change. Maybe
No, it's a directly pertinent change.
Well, so in that case, we're basically saying that, Andrew might not want to give anybody a conditional waiver. But if a facility is a green waste only facility, it's in the high desert, and the regional board does want to give that person a lower tier regulation, say a lower pond requirement, they would no longer be allowed to do that. We should revert that change.
But didn't you say they can make a finding that there's not going to be a significant impact?
Well, they could not regulate it if there's no impact to groundwater.
How would they do that under this regulation?
Because they don't, the regulation allows them not to permit.
So they don't have to give them a conditional waiver, they just can say, you're free.
I think we just need to point out the language.
Okay, I don't have it in front of me.
I have not been able to find anything that would let them do that.
Sure.
I think they could, there are alternatives for the pad, engineered alternatives that a regional board could approve. But in terms of the other requirements or even a waiver, I don't actually see how you would do that.
That'll be one of the things that needs to be clarified.
Yeah, the 2 areas that the gentleman mentioned earlier that are not a concern, I think we should exempt those, and that would make a big impact. So he mentioned that water that does not come in contact with the compost should not be part of this. We totally agree. Similarly, finished compost, which the comment was that that's not a concern. Well, if that's not a concern, why are we including it here? And we've seen that finished compost is really a stabilized material that's closer to soil. So those two things would make a big difference. And then just a couple really quick policy things.
But you're just saying no contact with the finished product, or no contact with the, what are you saying?
The previous versions of this regulation, there was a distinction between stormwater and wastewater, and we asked for that to be clarified, and it was clarified that everything is now wastewater. And
Right, and that was, you didn't find that
now,
as helpful.
I think we all now regret asking for that to be clarified.
Oh, I heard that in the dialogue.
So maybe we should just go back to the way that was in terms of contact water is wastewater, but everything else is not wastewater. And I just want to make a pitch for really finding a way to make this work economically for the industry. I've said this before, but we really need to take sort of a Carl Moyer approach to this industry.
Yes.
Industry that we want to see succeed, and there are environmental regulations that you want to implement. The way to do that is to find a revenue source statewide to help implement this. And we have legislation that's in spot bill form. But really, if you guys take the leadership role in advocating for that, I think we'll be able to get something done in finding a way to pay for this statewide, hopefully by charging fees on polluters to help fund the program. Thank you.
Novick, good to see you, followed by Jessica Jones.
Good evening, Madam Chair and board members. Thank you very much for holding this evening, and we appreciate the staff's time in the last few years and moving forward with the general order. My name is Linda Novick. I work with Harvest Power. We're organics recycling company throughout North America, and here in California we have 2 facilities in the Central Valley that hold full solid waste facility permits. We compost green food, and we'd like to compost manure as well. We have markets for all those products. We sell out of all the compost that we make, and so we sell it all to agriculture, and so we understand the benefits of composting. So we also have plans to expand throughout the state composting facilities, and our company's philosophy is to design and construct our composting facilities with pads, ponds, and berms. So we support that part of the order. We have been nervous about the economic effects of this order because before we had the engineering alternative, to tell you the truth, it was the pad but also the pond. The pond is not just 10 to the negative 6th. The pond is 10 to the negative 6th plus a liner plus a lysimeter. And for those of us who would like to use the water out of the pond but put it back on our composting facilities, the liner can be problematic with that. We believe that the engineering alternatives will be the way to do that, but we'll have to go to each individual board. And the boards have really been not really ready to work with us on that until the order has come into place. So we are not going to know when we go into each region whether or not we're going to be able to afford to put a composting facility there. The wastewater issues and other issues I think have already been addressed. But I also understand your concern about manure, but we would take manure from scrape feedlots where it's just sitting and not necessarily regulated, and composting that in a regulated fashion and then selling that material. There is a great need for composted manure. We compost it actually separately from the green material, and there's a huge market for that. So we like to just recognize that I think it could be a water quality benefit. And then there's so I'll let everybody else speak, but then there's another amendment clarification that I'd like to make. That under the new language, it says that the types and amounts of amendments must be specified in an NOI or a technical report and approved by the regional board. What we do for our farmers is we take the finished compost and we mix it with gypsum on our site under the quantities that they need, and then they pay for the gyp, they have it delivered to our site, we mix it, it's a service to them. If we don't do that, they have to apply the compost and then apply the gyp. That's a customer thing, so we don't know what those numbers are going to be until we go to sell the product. We won't know that at the time that we would be submitting the NOI. So I'll just let other people, I think everything else has been covered very well, and again, we appreciate your time.
Jessica Jones, followed by Will Fox. That's what I was going to say. Okay. You just have the extra letters in there. Got it.
Good evening. I'm here, Jessica Jones, and I'm representing Waste Management. I'm a consultant to them. I used to manage a compost facility and a landfill. I have been involved in permitting composting facilities, and we really feel that this order is necessary. We've been involved in it from the beginning, and it's almost there, but there's just some issues with it that we have that really, in the last changes, basically, that just weren't addressed appropriately, which most have been discussed. But I'm going to move the land app first, using mulch screen waste on land as mulch. There's many environmental benefits to that if it's done properly. And this order is about commercial composting. So that's to be addressed by the board and to make sure that that's done in an appropriate manner, not posing a threat to the waters of the state. That should be separate from this order. I would hate to see this order held up by that discussion, which is a much bigger discussion with CalRecycle. Also, chip and grind, chip and grind is what you need to do to get the material usually to a facility. To try to put those under this order, it's not commercial composting. It is a totally different process, and this order actually does a great job of addressing how you have to move those materials fast enough so you do not have a composting situation. As far as the minimum standard, that was one of our biggest issues with this. It looks like it is purposefully going to be a minimum standard. So if that is the case, which we feel the board should have more flexibility regionally, that's why there are so many regional boards. But if it is going to be a minimum standard, there is one major change that I think has been, that needs to be addressed. What was shown in the pictures, the composting facility with a pad, is a windrow operation where you have one pad, you build the rows, and you keep them there until they're totally done, until you're ready to screen out and make finished compost. You can't really permit one of those anymore in most of the air districts in California. You now need to do something that is more of a multi-stage process where you need to have, you have your inbound feedstock, which obviously can pose a threat to the waters of the state, and the active piles, which are usually mechanically aerated or something like that. Then when that process is finished and the pathogens have been reduced and it is no longer active, you move it to another part of your facility. That's where the curing occurs. That really doesn't pose the same threat to the waters of the state as the active and the inbound feedstock do. And to throw that all into wastewater is doing two things. It's actually, if you want to use that wastewater pond water, it may have pathogens in it. You're only going to use that on your active compost. You can't use that on your curing piles, let's say. So to give a site the ability to be under the general industrial stormwater permit with its non-active compost will allow that water to be reused in a manner that the site can not use, potable water, and then allow another pond, which 10 to the minus 6 sounds like that's what it's going to be, but a pond that really is a wastewater pond, to that water to be used on, which you have allowed, on the active piles is appropriate. So throwing it all into wastewater really does, basically it's going to increase the needs of sites to use potable water instead of wastewater. I shouldn't say wastewater. Instead of stormwater or contact water that's managed under the general permit.
And was the original language better?
No, but I think what staff tried to do was appropriate because it was very confusing because there was a lot of inconsistency on what's wastewater, what's contact water, what's stormwater. Really, it needs to just be, in our opinion, separated between active compost is wastewater that has the ability to generate leachate on its own, actually, even without applying water. Once it's gone through the active phase and its pathogens have been reduced, that is just like any other product. It's moved from a waste to a product, and it should be regulated as a product on your site, as a pile of dirt would be. That you need to, you need to have stormwater controls so that you don't impact the waters of the state. That would make this, and it would also reduce the pad size. It would reduce the pond size tremendously. It would reduce the economic costs.
So does that include when it's curing, finished product?
Yes, it does. I mean, once it moves into the curing phase, it doesn't have the ability. The sugars are gone, and there's experts here that can speak better to this than me. But it's not generating leachate anymore. So any water that falls on those piles actually typically is shed anyways, and you would be really looking at, there could be a chemical oxygen demand involved with that, but yet again, through an industrial stormwater permit, you could manage that. it really turns into more of a stormwater permit, which would completely cover that, I believe.
So we will look carefully at that. I know what staff was trying to do, which was trying to reduce the confusion about, well, I have a lane through here which I never put anything on, and so now is that stormwater or wastewater? And so we need to look again, because we clearly didn't get it right from what we're hearing here. We tend to agree that the idea that when you're getting to the point where it's compost, finished compost, we encourage people to put that on the ground and absorb stormwater. It's what we tell Caltrans to put on all of their right-of-ways at very, so at that point we're not needing a pad on it, obviously, and we're not looking for leachate out of it. So it's just getting that correct.
Right. And curing should be included in that discussion also, just because you just haven't screened it yet. It's still, it's still maturing. It's immature, but you could technically sell that material. It could leave the site, and actually sites may choose to, as soon as it's through the active stage, take it somewhere else, which is not regulated by the, I mean, that's, there's always a workaround. So I think that you'd rather see that material stay on the facility footprint and be managed in a way that's, more economical and is still protective of the waters of the state. So yeah, I'd love to discuss some more. Waste management, wasn't on the panel, but I think we have a lot of things that we could provide. And then we totally understand why we got to where you got with all wastewater, but that's more appropriate for a facility that just does windrows and does not move the product. But even they should have the option of moving to another pad to avoid managing all that water. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was interesting. Mr. Box from Sonoma Compost, followed by Zach Bagley from Ullum West Coast.
Hi, my name is Will Bax from Sonoma Compost. That was the facility that was the first picture on the staff's presentation with all the steam. We will be closing down October 15th as a result of was triggered by a lawsuit on the Clean Water Act. I want to say first that we had great support actually from the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board. They went out their way to state that they did not want to close us down, that they want to work with us in a path towards zero discharge, and accepted that plan. In that process, we did get first-hand experience in actually having to meet zero discharge right away, and I want to share some of the costs that we incurred as a result, because I think that the economic analysis is ways off. First thing that we did is we combined ponds that we had to get greater capacity for water storage and put a new liner in there. That was a cost of $400,000. To get to really zero discharge, we would have to build a second pond. That was not feasible, and that's really what killed the facility. We had tiger salamander risk out there, and we couldn't build that pond. But that would have cost another $1.5 million to build that pond. The outhaul of water that we did, this was a drought year. We had about less than 2/3 of the rain that we normally get, and the outhaul cost of the water was over $400,000. A regular year would cost us over $600,000, and if we're going to get a wet El Nino, it would be over $1 million a year to cover those costs. So those are significant costs. We're also looking at, and Neil spoke of that, a new facility that hopefully will be online in 3 years, but it could be 4 or 5 years because a lawsuit will be filed against that one too. But the additional cost for dealing with just water quality in that facility was $16.5 million. So that's a significant investment. Now, we are in a high rainfall area, but that's a significant investment. I believe that the report said something like that $25 million would cover the whole of California. Well, we take $16.5 million out of that. So that's on the economics. The other thing that I find a little bit deceptive in the rule that we have here right now is that it says something about preparing for a minimum of a 25-year, 24-hour storm, but you require zero discharge. And, it's like if someone thinks that it can build an infrastructure for a 25-year, 24-hour storm, that's a joke. It's like you have a Pineapple Express coming in, it's like you need many of those similar ponds, and that needs to be taken into economic consideration.
Can you clarify that?
Yes, I can, because the point of having a storm size is that's the amount of that you have to contain. This order does not require zero discharge. It says that you have to contain up to the 25-year, 24-hour storm event.
I misunderstood that then. Thank you. The other thing that I find a little bit puzzling is, when that's related to the zero discharge then, and now I understand why you have restrictions or maybe amendments. I was thinking, but if you're zero discharge, then why put restrictions because you're zero discharge? But okay, I let that one go. On the manure side, I do think I agree with some comments that were made before that manure should be in a tier 1. I think that that's a processing question. It's like that you have the right carbon-nitrogen ratio, the right moisture content. As such, it does not pose any more risk than a green materials facility, in my opinion. So I think that that should be moved to a tier 1.
One of my questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to talk about manure a little bit? Why did y'all put manure in tier 2? Since people put it on their front lawn all the time, stuff like that.
I can't answer that question, but I'm going to sit down with staff and we're going to talk about the threats posed by manure. I believe the answer is that manure has pathogens in it, has a higher waste concentration than green waste, and that there was concern that once you put that in, you have a higher potential for nitrate and for leachate runoff. But I need to talk more.
Yeah, that's just one's on my list, and the answers aren't all or nothing. Options aren't all or nothing. Okay, good. Mr. Bagley, followed by Eric Patash. Oh, I just couldn't read it, sorry. My eyes, not your writing.
Zach Bagley. I'm here representing Olin West Coast Inc. Today. I want to really appreciate the board's willingness to stay. It's almost 8:30 here, so thank you for taking this time. Olin is a tomato processor up in Williams. In 2012, we recognized, hey, we've got a wastewater facility that's under an existing WDR, which we still have. It's a 600-acre ranch, basically, where we grow grasses. And during the season, we're throwing thousands of tons of what we call wet waste, as well as pumice sometimes, onto this land. So we're basically land applying, doing what everybody today has said is a huge problem. In 2012, we said, hey, we could stop land applying and turn this into compost on this 600-acre facility. And yes, get something better. We work with organic growers. They could buy it. It would pay for all this to happen. So we did that in 2012. We talked to the water board. They basically said, yeah, sounds like a great idea. But then all of these new regulations came up, which make a lot of sense in a lot of different areas. I'm just trying to figure out, in our particular circumstance, where we don't have the composting under our particular WDR, but we're doing it, where do we stand?
Well, I can't answer your question right off the top of the bat, but you have a WDR for your processing facility there. We generally like to have one order for a facility, so it would make sense to include the composting in that. I assume you're with the Central Valley Board. I can't remember where you said you were from. I'm sorry. It's 8 o'clock.
I believe that
Williams, yes. So you're being.
My auditor is Guy Childs, if that helps.
So you would be in Williams, and the person to talk to is sitting right over there, nodding his head.
He will. That man will
nice
help
jacket,
you.
nice looking tie.
But I would. That's true. You may not want to talk to him. I might. I would encourage you to connect with them and then connect with us, because it's right now as it stands. You don't have anything that covers the composting, that you would need to sign up for a composting activity permit like this general. But what we were trying to say is that existing orders that have other activities on them that are doing it should continue to do that. It might make perfect sense for you to amend your order to deal with composting and not have two different permits.
It's more efficient, which is partially what the goal is.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm asking for, because if we were to go under the new general order, just like we're a very small operation, just like others have said, we're going to start land applying all of that material again because we couldn't afford it. So
talk to that man and then let that man know how it went. Get both of their cards before you leave. Thank you. And our cleanup batter.
My name is Eric Potashner from Ecology. We operate 6 compost facilities in the state. Roughly, we process 700,000 tons of green waste and food waste a year in California. Most of the points I was going to make have already been made. I really do want to echo the one speaker that talked about separating the differences between the active composting process and the curing and final product. There are significant investments we're going to be making at our facilities, mostly around the working surfaces that we think could be generally brought down if the final product and even the curing stage are not subject to those same requirements. While most facilities do have this choice or engineered alternative in the order, I can just speak to our operations. We have excavators, we have loaders, we have heavy equipment. They're just not going to hold up. We're going to have to go with concrete. And that's really an operational issue for ourselves. And it would be worth looking at the economic analysis around concrete. We're getting bids now for about $300,000 an acre. I think the number up there was about a third less than that, or 2/3 less than that.
It was $81,000 an acre.
Concrete.
So,
Yeah, we're looking at about $300,000 an acre now, and we're bidding it now. And we've actually started an individual WDR for our site with the Central Valley that we have sort of modeled over this general order. So the extent for our facility, which is a 125-acre site, we're looking at about somewhere between $10 and $13 million of investment. And we're happy to do it, and we are supporting the order, but we do think that one place where we can make some significant savings is this issue between active and curing.
Percentage of a reduction? What kind?
What percentage of a reduction? Probably 25% reduction in the size of the pads, depending on.
So I'd love to see some of your information on that, and we'll work with you on the active curing versus active.
And the last issue I'd bring up was, and we had signed on to the industry letter, was the issue of the 6-year period starting at the NOI. We would think it would make more sense to have that 6-year period start once you receive the NOA, because then you really have that stamp of approval that your NOI is complete and that your project is ready to go forward. Then we would just ask for that to be reevaluated. Thanks.
Something you have any flexibility on? Okay, there you go. Put that on the list.
Thank you.
Wait. So just for my fellow board members, I was at the Recology site in Vernalis last week.
When you went to visit. Okay.
So what is it about that facility that causes you to believe that you need to use concrete instead of compacted soil? Is there something about the soil type?
Something about mostly the size of the facility and the large fleet that we have of yellow iron, that we would spend a lot of time with the maintenance of the soil and the compacted soil. And we think that for an efficiency reason, we'd have to go with concrete.
But this is the area that I keep saying I think there might be a disconnect, because staff seems to think that the other alternatives would be considered because they're not as costly.
It may work for another operation.
Pardon me?
That may work for another operation. It just won't work for ours.
And so just to make sure I'm clear, it's because you have, it's the amount of truck traffic and the size of the equipment would tear up.
Correct.
Okay.
So is there a tipping point where that might happen? We don't need to talk about it now, but just, for staff to be looking at those issues, I think would be helpful to get a better idea.
Right, because a smaller facility won't have as big of equipment. And does it have to do with the materials you use or just the size?
Mostly about the equipment and the quantities of food waste and green waste that we're bringing in. It's one of the larger facilities in the state.
Right. All right, thank you. I have to say, I know it's been a long day, but as people have come into specific issues, articulating what the challenge is, that's the most helpful for us, as opposed to the bigger generic, this is good, that's bad, because that doesn't help. So I want to thank those of you who did that, particularly towards the end for some reason, very helpful. All right. I have my list, but do you have list for direction to staff, the rest of you? Presumably you do have some.
I mean, obviously, I will be following up with staff, but there's just one point that I guess I want to share my thoughts on for my colleagues' consideration, and that's this issue of considering a general permit that would allow the regional board to adopt less stringent requirements, I would be very concerned about taking that step. And I think, we've seen through other items that have come before the board that there's a way to build into the permit we issue flexibility for the executive officer or the regional board itself to consider certain factors and perhaps move people into certain tiers or whatever. Or as Charlotte spoke earlier today, allowing them to make a finding that it's not a threat to water, therefore does not regulate. But we can build that into the general order. And if if staff needs a little bit more time to build that into the order, I would much prefer that than to go forward with an order that doesn't establish a minimum threshold, which is what I've always viewed a statewide general order to do. Set a minimum threshold, provide some flexibility, but the thinking here is that's the consistent regulatory threshold across the state, unless there is very special findings that requires more stringency. And that's my preference for this as well as any sort of statewide general order. So I just want to toss that out since that issue has come up several times today.
I agree. I agree with that. I think that's good. Please write some in response to comments. Write something special for the dairies. Make sure they absolutely, with all that energy that he had, we've got to respond. I think this active versus cured separation is one that we really should look at, because if we're really not getting the damage from cured, then they shouldn't have to factor it in. And I would suggest that the group that you consulted with a lot, the regional boards, and Cal Recycle, that you reconvene that group to go over some of the comments that you've written down here to parse through them, because really it is all about the regional boards and what they're going to do with this, and Cal Recycle as well. And finally, I would suggest that we consider a resolution to accompany the order, and I hope we vote on it sooner rather than later. As you know, I really want to move on this one. But we have a resolution with Cal Recycle about using the ability of their field staff to do some of the inspections, and that we basically work something out that would help them as well as help us. But I think that's more of a resolution, because I think it's going to take longer than I would be comfortable with. But I do think that there's potential there.
We need a resolution for that, or when we considered this order, we could also just give direction to staff to work with Cal Recycle and bring
sure.
or delegate it to the executive office director to sign an MOA, negotiate and sign an MOA.
Exactly, that's what I'm thinking about. Okay, so we do however we do it, I think that's the direction we should be going. Thank you.
Those were all very good comments, and I agree with what everyone said, not in any particular order, just kind of trying to fill in some additional ones. I don't have an opinion on exactly what to do, but just revisiting this whole issue of different types of water and water that is not in contact with the pile. Okay. On the economic analysis, I am sensitive to what Debbie Raphael said from San Francisco about, just them needing to be able to provide information when they increase their fees. And so any way to provide additional information, including any changes in the price for concrete, without having to redo the economic analysis. I like the idea. We will do a resolution anyway, so whether it's on that issue of Cal Recycle, but just adding a few others. Nick Lappis's suggestion about incentive dollars. We should be working with our sister agencies and Healthy Soils. I know that's where we're headed anyway, but on a incentive program like Carl Moyer. And I made a note here to talk to Tom about it for, requests going into the budget for next year. And then also on this issue of land application, I completely agree that now is not the time to fix this. We don't want to delay moving forward on the general order, but let's call out that issue and commit to doing what we can because we have to level the playing field for those that are in the industry working on this. And if we have others that are inappropriately using land application, however to address that. And I think there was something else, just not organized here. No, I think that's good. All right.
And I forgot to tell all of you, I have for 30 years been composting using worms. I'm a vermiculturist.
Did you have one of our pilot worm bins back in the 90s? You were one of those?
Oh, I had one.
Do you have a leachate coming off of that?
Oh, and
right.
I should say before moving on, where's Scott? Scott's probably sick and tired of me. He's just been terrific to work with on this. So thank you, Shala, John, everybody, for all your work on this. And I know we've got a little more to do before getting over the finish line.
Mine are similar. I agree. The issues I have is figure out what to do about economics. Doesn't mean redo the whole EIR, but it means figure out how to make sure, and you can use me as a guinea pig, that how we talk about it is clear to folks. And I would like you just to talk to Debbie about that issue, Debbie Raphael, so follow up. Excellent. I want that to be clear, and so that we, it is what it is, but we're also explaining a recognition. Obviously, concrete costs change over time. It's when every time you go out to bid on a project, your concrete costs can be different. They go up, they go down. Depends on the demand for different things and all that. But just a more sophisticated conversation about manure. Glad it's already on your list, because if it doesn't need to be on that list, or you do a percentage thing, that might be helpful in meeting more of our objectives when you think about what the alternatives are. Food waste definition, that issue of plastics, I just want to make sure we don't run afoul of something, and that talk to the Bakersfield guy and get that so it doesn't end up messing up that ice cream composting.
Yeah, I might mess that up because it's plastic, and that I might be messing him up even worse than he wants when I talk to him. But I'll try to be.
You'll have to tell me how that goes, because I actually think, again, you don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. Don't want to be pinheads. The criteria for no impact, that whole thing, obviously there were a lot of people who didn't pick up on that in terms of what was in the language, so clarifying that, the things that you thought were in there that other people didn't think were in there, I think it's important to clarify, and I want to see what the criteria for that is too. That's one of those punch list things to talk to me, as well as others, but that's one of the ones I'm going to talk about. The question of the percentage of additives, I want to understand that better. We don't have time tonight, how you came up with that, why it's an across the board, no matter what the additive is, et cetera. That issue was raised. I'm going to want to hear that. Similar the amendments issue that Ms. Novick listed, where if they're doing it custom for folks, how do we handle that? That's, again, a practical implication that may have seemed simple in an assumption that it's a constant feed or a constant product, but in fact they're custom mixes. This definitions shift, from 4 different kinds of water to wastewater. Clearly you've heard from a lot of people that could be problematic. So talking with some of those folks that raised it and seeing if there's yet another path. Dairy clarification and existing WDR clarification, that issue could be clearer. Call out the green waste, as was said, and what we're going to do about that in terms of just put Andrew's phone number in it, probably? No, that wouldn't be the right answer, but something to acknowledge it but not waste, right? Yeah, Chris and Andrew's phone number, but also, that write-up to acknowledge the concern a little bit more?
I'm sorry, that last one,
What we're going to do about it?
about which?
About the illegal green waste, spreading land application. Or food waste for that matter, just land application. Again, I agree with Fran, we don't have to solve that whole problem before we can do anything that is important. The curing versus active, we've talked about, that could solve a lot of issues. So that was all very helpful. I think that's clarifying. I want to agree with what Board Member Dodek said about if we, there's, one of the things I've heard is, I did hear an acknowledgement that the changes you made were very responsive and are good. Some folks want yet another tier or something a little bit lower. I don't know enough to pick one of those, but I would prefer to set a threshold standard that's not overly high so that you're not messing with the small rural areas or somewhere where it doesn't matter. So take a look at that and see if you either want to drop the threshold or create another lower tier, whatever. But I agree that I believe in the value of a general order. So if we can do it, but not one that sweeps in too much, obviously. So I think that was actually pretty good. And I think you covered most of them. I am going to want to hear about your conversation with Bakersfield. Cost, it's mostly cost.
And just while you're looking, I am following very carefully this short life pollutant the short life pollutant policy that CARB is working on, and several of your staff are helping with this as well. So it's extremely important for wastewater facilities as well as composting facilities and others. So there's it's just our slice of that short life pollutant is not gigantic.
The one thing that you mentioned in terms of the, I can't remember who said this, I have to go back in the notes, but that the physical properties may vary, like, and one of the arguments should, someone argued should have performance requirements. I don't think you need to retool the whole thing, but the question of whether there's groundwater there's got to be something in there, either in the finding of no impact or in your lowest tier that allows for, maybe it's only a few places, but allows for some place to meet a lower standard.
We will definitely clarify that issue, and so we will.
Like a, yeah. And maybe it is just pond size that deals with drier climate or whatnot, but that issue becomes important to me, just in terms of trying to make sure you avoid not just unintended impacts, but an overall, the situation where it just leads to illegal dumping or other things, because illegal dumping is a big issue in rural areas. I think that covers all of them. Anything else?
I think you touched on pretty much everything I can imagine. I think that's important, though, that we don't want unintended consequences where there's facilities that are working well and are protecting water quality, especially in rural areas. But like I said, that's important if true. You know, we haven't really looked at any data.
Someone's got to tell Terry how
That's a great phrase. But yes, these flexibilities are important. Not all compost piles are equal, as we've discussed. And so I think within the general order, we need to identify that. But I think you can tell I'm interested in moving this as quickly as possible and looking for ways that we can make minor modifications that are logical outgrowth of these discussions and get this on the board agenda as fast as possible. That's my preference.
Right. All righty then. Closing thoughts?
No, but I will just give change the expectations. Given the number of issues that we're going to look at, we're not going to be able to get this back on July 7th. We will shoot for July 21st, but I just want to be clear. There's just more here than we can. We'll make it for as soon as possible. I just wanted to set expectations because we just won't be able to do this in 2 weeks. We need to communicate with some people and get some. We will definitely do it as soon as we can.
All right. Thank you all for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your helpful suggestions. And we'll see you again soon. We'll reconvene tomorrow. I'm opposing that we don't want to talk about the executive director's report or do board member reports.
Oh.
We'll decide at the end of tomorrow whether we want to. And so we will recess until tomorrow morning at 9.